I can't wait for someone in the comments to point out that I'm wearing a civil rights t-shirt. Israel Folau, the troublesome Australian rugby star, is once again in the news. Okay, so some of you might recall a while back doing a video on this Israel Folau. He made waves. When he posted on Instagram, he actually commented. He posted something on Instagram that mentioned that homosexuals were among those, unrepentant homosexuals were among those who were not saved, and responded to someone's comment challenging that by saying something like, you know, Jesus loves everyone, we love everyone, but I also know that, you know, if you don't repent and submit to Jesus, then you're going to hell. And the same is true of everyone, of adulterers, of thieves, anyone who is unrepentant. And that caused quite a kerfuffle. As an editorial in New Zealand at the time pointed out, Qantas, which sponsors Australia Rugby, made some grumpy noises, and Australia Rugby jumped because they were afraid of losing that sponsorship money. What the editorial in New Zealand pointed out was that Qantas has a very deep relationship with Emirates Air, which you see, you know, Emirates sponsors soccer and rugby all over Europe, all over the world. And of course in the UAR, well, let's not even talk about what the penalty for being a homosexual there is. So, you know, the irony was not lost on some, but mostly there was a witch hunt. Now, one of the things you have to realize about Folau is it's not a Colin Kaepernick situation. Well, Colin Kaepernick was kind of a stud and quickly fell off. Israel Folau is the best rugby player in Australia and one of the best in the entire world. So, he's in the news again because he once again posted something on Instagram after, you know, there was a face-off the first time around, which Folau won more than Australia Rugby won. Australia Rugby threatened a lot of things and didn't do any of them. But Folau did promise to behave a little more. There's a lot of vituperation, not only coming from within the camp of Australia Rugby, but from Australian rugby players, Australians, and really a lot of folks in the rugby community around the world. So he has misbehaved. He posted this post, and I think it's being seen as a provocation, and I think it is. Some people wondered last time around if he was just trying to get out of his contract in order to go play more lucratively in Japan or something. It does seem like he is throwing down the gauntlet to these guys. So it's about to get hairy. It's about to get exciting. I want to talk about three things that are of interest to us as Christians, observing this as a phenomenon, placing it in our own context and thinking about our own behaviors. So three things for us to pensate upon. Here's what the post says. Warning: drunks, homosexuals, adulterers, liars, fornicators, thieves, atheists, idolaters. Hell awaits you. Repent. Only Jesus saves. The first thing that I want to point out is that, you know, people are posting this, and it's interesting because I'm seeing on Facebook people who I know have zero interest in rugby sharing this story about Folau. So it's making waves. And what a lot of people are saying is the equivalent of, this is where we've come to. This is what we've come to. This is the point where we're at. This is how bad things have gotten. And I want to suggest people that it's been this bad for a long time. That Instagram post would be absolutely unacceptable for a corporate manager. Forget an executive, like a manager, right? You would certainly not be hired at a lot of places. You could be fired at a lot of places, right? And a lot of institutions, even the United States, would ignore the legal risk, okay? But what is certainly already in place is a heavy silence. Christians feel that they cannot talk about certain things. I mean, a lot of the aspects of their faith are secret from their coworkers because of the cost that might have to be paid down the road. I was hanging out with an Egyptian Christian the other day, and he was talking about how persecution in most of Egypt, so in some parts of the countryside, you know, there are fights between the traditionally Christian and the traditionally Muslim, and sometimes the Muslim do kill the Christians. But he said, you know, in most of Egypt, especially in the cities, people have learned to sort of be cooler about the whole thing, not talk about it openly. But what happens is that people get denied promotions. People don't get jobs. Partnerships are not entered into. So, you know, it's Egyptian society, urbane, educated Egyptian society, especially in academia, but also in business. If they know you're a Christian, they cut you out of the loop, okay? They don't tell you about important stuff when you're part of the staff. You make one mistake, you're gone, as opposed to a normal employee who might get a little bit of rope. Okay, so that's already a reality for many American Christians who have to be very, very careful what they admit to and what they talk about in the workplace. So I don't think this, you know, we're used to the idea of thinking of our artists and athletes and certain other exceptional people who seem to be independent because of their great skill, their great ability, the approval of the crowd for what they do. We're used to them being able to kind of say whatever they want. But a lot of these basic fundamental Christian truths are not acceptable to say. In an artistic sphere, perhaps, or an athletic sphere, perhaps it impresses us more because we expect that, you know, the superstar should be able to say these things. But no, not even the superstar. But it's been this way. It's been hostile for a long, long time. For most of Australia to think that Israel Folau was in the wrong to say these things, accountants in Australia already have to deal with this sort of thing. And one of the things that's going to happen from this is that we're going to have a Gattaca type situation, right? You're going to have an underclass. You're going to have an underclass of Christians who, you know, there's just going to be a tendency that Christians get pushed into lower and lower positions because you can be a garbage man and think that gay marriage is wrong. If you think that gay marriage is wrong and you're applying for an executive position, a management position, a professorial position, you're going to be less and less likely to get that position. You're already, if people find this sort of stuff in your social media, you've got to be discreet about it already. And if you're not, you're done, right? So I think that there's going to be more and more marginalization, and this is not something new. This has been going on for several years now. So that's the first thing. That it's not that, oh, this is what we've come to. This is where we've been for a while. The second thing is that centralization is a danger to Christians. And our Chinese brothers and sisters can attest to that, right? A lot of them are essentially, what they're doing, although they are excluded from the political process, a lot of what they're doing is politically motivated by trying to decentralize a lot of things. Because they realize that when one group of people, small group of people, has all the power, if the Christians run against that, then of course the Christians need to be suppressed. And here in the United States and in many parts of the world, the government and legal entities, institutions are becoming more and more centralized. This is the case with Australia Rugby. So Australia Rugby right now is talking about terminating Folau's contract. Australia Rugby is talking about that now. So he plays for the Australian national team, but he also plays for a professional club in Sydney called the New South Wales Waratahs. Now, the thing about rugby in both Australia and New Zealand is that it's run by the national body for that sport. Okay? Rugby was amateur into the mid-90s, completely amateur. And that left a lot of very interesting and many very positive legacies in rugby throughout the world. But as they were professionalizing and thinking about what that would look like in Australia and New Zealand, what was done was that the rugby unions, okay, the governing entities, not the clubs, not the individual clubs, were the ones that professionalized and made contracts, etc. So there are smaller clubs that are private in those two countries, but then they combine to create these professional teams. And the Waratahs are licensed. So what Australia Rugby does is that they either run the club themselves and hope to make money off of it. Sometimes they lose money, or they license it to someone. Okay, so in the NFL, for example, in American sports, you have a business owner, and he owns the club for whatever reasons, right? Like the Dallas Mavericks make money, but they're also a passion project. And people who know the sports know that, for example, the LA Clippers, even when they were terrible, made a bunch of money. So for the guy who owned the Clippers, it was a business first. Other guys own these sports teams as vanity projects, as passion projects, I should say, and they don't care how much money they lose. They want to have the greatest club. Okay, but it doesn't matter because you have an owner or an ownership group, and they're making these decisions for the club. Okay, and one of the biggest factors is indeed trying to make money. Now, there is a group that believes they can make money with the Waratahs, so they have this license. I think it actually might expire this year. Regardless, so Australia Rugby gives out 5-year licenses. So Australia Rugby administrates all the professional contracts in that country. Okay, so you have the national governing body of the sport. You don't have any buffer between the athletes and the national organization. I mean, if you think about American football, the national organization is hardly even known. There's an American, football association out there. They're the guys who are changing the structure of youth sports, for example, so that coaches are teaching a safer method of tackling. They're the guys who, in combination with the NFL and college football, are looking at helmets and pads and all that. So there's a national entity. But really, they are very unimportant when compared to the league and the owners. And legally, technically, they have nothing to do with the NFL. It's just a governing body for the sport. Okay. The Olympics deal with these governing bodies when they're Olympic sports, which obviously American football isn't. Okay, so an organization like that, right? That's who runs rugby and runs all the contracts and all the athletes out of Australia. So there's not a person or an ownership group interested in protecting their star because he makes them a ton of money, regardless of what his persuasion is, okay? Sometimes that can be good, sometimes that can be bad. But the fact is, that buffer doesn't exist, okay? So when you have this centralization, there are no checks, okay? That's what I'm trying to communicate. It could be for a myriad of other reasons, okay? Just or unjust. There is no appeal. Who could Folau appeal to? World Rugby, perhaps? Right? So when the Kaepernick, which is a very different situation, but when the Kaepernick situation arose, ultimately, the overwhelming public pressure was what broke things down. But there was a lot of tension between a lot of groups. The fans, the owners of the 49ers, the athletes themselves, the owners of the other teams, the league, all of them with their different motivations, different reasons for wanting to do things, and that created a long, painful process, okay? But to some degree, it actually buffered a lot of the stuff against Kaepernick. All right, so there's absolutely no buffer for Folau, and we as Christians should be very leery of any efforts to centralize. We should also be wary of trying to use that centralization to our own benefit. Now, has it been done successfully in the past? Sure it has. It was even done in the Bible. All right, when Esther and oh goodness, I almost said Haman. Esther and I'm so embarrassed. Anyway, the edict was put out that the Jews could arm themselves to counter the edict that the Jews could be killed. That what came from the centralization of power. But it's a very, very dangerous thing. The centralization of power was what made the law to kill all the Jews possible in the first place. So we should be very, very leery of such things, and aware of the threat that is. And I think this kind of touches back on the point I made about marginalization with jobs. We're going to want to protect ourselves, and we're going to want to develop in the positive frame of this word, which might be impossible for people maybe to grasp. And I don't want World War II and Holocaust things thrown out there as the first point, but we need to ghettoize. We need to be creating communities in which our own musicians can prosper in our own musical scenes, in which our own fishmongers can prosper in our own dining scenes. We need to create an environment where we create our own schools, where we create our own books, where we have our parallel cultures, but I think, and with a lot of overlap. But I think it's getting to the point where we're going to have to start institutionalizing things in order to create these buffers, right? If I'm an engineer and I get fired for my Christian beliefs, wouldn't it be nice to know that there's a huge, immense community of millions of Christians who are willing to have me design things for them? So maybe be thinking about how you can be a part of that. So the last point to be mentioned, which perhaps should have been the first, because it's, I've been kind of beating at it for a little while, is that Christians are not welcome. Okay? Those of us who live in pluralistic societies, we have this idea that we've been told, the line is that all beliefs and all viewpoints are welcome. And that's simply not the case, and that has to do with identity politics. Right? Christians have been identified as the ones who built the society, who therefore have the power, and the way our society functions now, victims are the ones who get to speak. If you have power, you don't have the right to speak. Now, we've just spent a lot of time talking about how we are excluded, and you will notice that Christians who have points in this ranking scale through other means, right? Race, any kind of ethnic background, some cultural stuff. They get a little more leeway than those who don't. But the bottom line is, Christianity has been identified in this way, Christians have been identified in this way, and you don't get to speak. And we need to be aware of that. And by that I don't mean that you shouldn't speak. You should be aware that there are penalties to it. Which again goes back to let's protect each other from that. Let's provide safety nets for each other from that, because we want to enable people to be able to speak and to speak the truth. We also need to be wise. We need to be aware of the cost that's to be paid. Now, I don't know what Folau's game is. And And, you know, even saying the word game is perhaps unjust. I don't know what his play is. It certainly does seem like he's making a play, like he's forcing something. And that could be really good, right? Because now people are talking about it. Just don't act like it's not fair. It is fair. It's the fight we have right now. All right, the peace of Christ be upon you.